She did not cry when the Duke refused to kiss her. The choir's last note trembled through the vaulted ceiling of St. George's, and the air between them felt colder than stone. Hundreds watched from beneath plumed hats and jeweled fans, their silence heavy with hunger, for gossip, for cruelty, for the taste of another woman's shame. Lady Evelina Ashcombe stood motionless, her veil fluttering like a wounded wing. The man beside her, Alaric Devereux, Duke of Wynthorpe, had fulfilled every duty except tenderness. He bowed to the priest, to the crown, to the watching world, but not to her. The moment passed like a blade drawn across silk. When the officiant's voice declared them husband and wife, no cheer followed. Only the slow rustle of fabric, the whisper of disbelief. He did not even touch her. Outside, carriages waited in neat rows, horses stamping impatience against the cobbles of Hanover Square. Rain threatened in the sky's gray seam, the kind that promised to ruin satin and pride alike. Alaric offered his arm out of courtesy, nothing more. She placed her gloved hand upon it, and for a heartbeat she felt the strength beneath his restraint, the heat that should have belonged to love. Then it was gone. He released her the instant they reached the carriage door. London streets blurred past, smudged faces, flickering torches, and the echo of cheers meant for other brides. Inside the carriage neither spoke. Evelina kept her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, watching the world turn to watercolor. She had imagined this day since childhood, when her governess whispered fairy tales about dukes and destiny. Yet here she sat, bound to a man whose silence felt like exile. The Duke of Wynthorpe was not cruel by nature, but by inheritance. His father's name was built upon restraint, a dynasty carved from obedience to decorum. Alaric had learned early that feeling was weakness, affection a liability. He married because his house demanded an heir and because Evelina's dowry would steady the debts his father left behind. She, bright with kindness and wit, had seemed a convenient ornament, a rose for a crumbling facade. But on the morning of their wedding, he heard a whisper in White's club that her father's investments had faltered, that the Ashcombe fortune was thinner than promised. The insult burned. Pride, his oldest armor, closed around him once more. When the carriage reached Wynthorpe House, servants bowed in a corridor lit by hundreds of candles. Their new mistress curtsied to them with a gentleness that startled the Duke. It was not humility but grace. He dismissed them with a curt nod and turned to her. "You may take the east wing," he said, voice smooth as cut glass. "My chambers are across the courtyard. I prefer solitude." Pause. She tried to find some thread of warmth in his expression, some sign that the ceremony had not been entirely hollow. "As you wish, your grace." Her words, careful and soft, did not reach him. He turned away before she could finish her curtsy. Night settled over London. From her window, Evelina watched lamps glitter along the Thames. The gown that had once seemed a dream now felt like armor too heavy to bear. She removed her veil with deliberate calm and placed it upon the vanity. For the first time she allowed her hands to tremble. Downstairs, the Duke sat alone in his study, brandy untouched beside a dying fire. He told himself that distance was mercy. She would learn to live quietly as so many duchesses before her had done. Yet the memory of her eyes, gray, luminous, unflinching, followed him. They had not pleaded, they had only seen him, and that unnerved him more than tears ever could. The Tun feasted that night on scandal. In drawing rooms across Mayfair, ladies fanned themselves and whispered of the untouched bride. Some pitied her, most relished it. A few speculated that the Duke's heart was promised elsewhere. Others declared he possessed no heart at all. By morning the story had crossed from gossip to legend. When Evelina descended to breakfast, the butler's expression betrayed what he had heard. She took her seat at the long mahogany table, its opposite end empty. The silence mocked her until she could bear it no longer. Rising, she turned to the footman. "Have my trunks sent to the country," she said. "If His Grace requires my presence, he will know where to find me." Wynthorpe Manor lay 3 days' ride away, a vast estate sleeping under the Kentish rain. There, among overgrown gardens and neglected halls, Evelina found a strange peace. She walked the grounds, spoke with servants who barely remembered warmth in the house, and restored life where her husband had let time decay. The villagers soon adored her, calling her the Angel of Wynthorpe. She answered letters, tended the sick, and began to breathe again. Alaric, meanwhile, returned to his London clubs, to politics and propriety. Yet each week brought him some rumor of his wife's quiet triumphs. A letter from his steward praised her efficiency, a visiting cousin remarked upon her charm. He dismissed each account with feigned indifference. Still, when he passed her empty chair at dinner or found her name engraved upon donations to local charities, he felt a tightening in his chest that no brandy could ease. Autumn arrived. Evelina's portrait, commissioned by her father before the marriage, was delivered to the Duke's gallery. The artist had captured her poised but luminous, hands clasped gently, eyes holding both sorrow and courage. Alaric stood before it for a long time, uncertain whether the ache he felt was guilt or fascination. He thought of their wedding day, the whispering congregation, the way she had stood still as a statue while he denied her even a gesture of tenderness. He had believed himself untouchable then. But solitude, once his sanctuary, had turned restless. He found himself wondering what she might be doing at that very hour, reading by the hearth perhaps, or walking through the orchard in her shawl. The thought unsettled him. At Wynthorpe Manor, Evelina received word that her husband would remain in London for the winter. The letter was brief, and signed except by formality. She smiled faintly and folded it away. In her journal she wrote, "The distance has made me visible, to myself if not to him." That night, unable to sleep, she sat by the window and watched frost gather on the panes. Somewhere in the darkness, a carriage wheel echoed on the far road, a sound that made her heart flutter despite her resolve. She told herself it was only passing travelers, nothing more. Yet when dawn broke, a single envelope lay upon her writing desk, sealed with the crest of Wynthorpe. Inside, in the Duke's hand, were 6 words: "I will return before spring ends." No explanation, no apology, only a promise that felt like a summons. Evelina traced the ink with her fingertip, unsure whether to fear or hope. For the first time since her wedding, she allowed herself to whisper his name. Alaric. And in some London chamber still heavy with brandy and regret, the Duke startled awake, certain he had heard his wife speak. The letter came with the first thaw, creased and rain-spotted, as though the miles had conspired to bruise it. Evelina read it beneath the bare branches of the orchard, her hands trembling despite the cold. The Duke of Wynthorpe would return before spring's end. The words, simple and austere, struck her like a tolling bell. He had not written since the day he left her standing in the echo of vows he would not honor. Now, without reason or remorse, he announced his return, as though she had waited all this while. By the time the Duke's carriage thundered through the wrought-iron gates of Wynthorpe Manor, the world had shifted. The manor no longer bore the silence he had left behind. Its corridors breathed warmth, the servants moved with purpose, laughter sometimes escaped through open windows. The Duchess, once the ghost of his household, had resurrected it. Even the gardens, once overgrown with neglect, now spilled with early blooms. It was as though life itself had conspired to defy his indifference. When Alaric entered, his boots echoing on the marble floor, he found no trembling bride waiting to greet him. Instead, Evelina stood by the grand staircase, composed and radiant, her poise unassailable. Her gown was modest but elegant, her hair caught with pearl pins. She inclined her head politely, not warmly. "Your Grace," she said, as if greeting a distant acquaintance. He searched her face for some flicker of the girl he had left behind, the uncertain wife, the silent figure beside him at the altar. But the woman before him had changed. Her voice carried quiet confidence. Her eyes, once pleading for recognition, now regarded him as one might study a stranger's portrait. "Wynthorpe seems improved," he said after a pause, more defensive than he intended. "Time and care, Your Grace," she replied evenly. Both things the house had been long without. Her composure unsettled him. He had expected reproach, perhaps even tears, anything that would reaffirm his control. Instead, he found himself disarmed by civility. In the days that followed, he observed her from a distance. The villagers adored her. Each morning she rode into the market square, distributing food and medicine to families of soldiers lost in the Peninsular War. In the afternoons, she oversaw the restoration of the orphanage. Wherever she went, warmth followed. Alaric watched her laugh with a group of children one morning, watched as sunlight caught the curve of her cheek, the loosened tendril of hair brushing her jaw, and felt something twist inside him. That evening he joined her for dinner, unannounced. The long dining table, once symbolic of their estrangement, now bore flowers and candlelight. She looked up from her meal, surprised but unshaken. "I trust London no longer holds your interest?" she asked, folding her napkin. "London holds little but noise," he said. "And death." "Then perhaps it is well you've come home." The word home unsettled him. It had never sounded like a place before, only a duty. Now it trembled with a meaning he could not name. He tried to meet her gaze but found himself uncharacteristically uncertain. "You've done well here," he said at last. The villagers speak of you. I should hope so, she said, her tone light but edged. It is easier to speak of kindness than to practice it. He set down his wineglass, unable to miss the implication. Silence filled the space between them like fog, thick, stifling, intimate. Days turned into weeks. Their exchanges remained formal but cautious, as though they moved within a fragile truce neither dared to break. One afternoon, Alaric entered the library to find her seated by the window, writing letters. He hesitated in the doorway, watching her pen glide across the page. You write often, he said. Words are faithful company, she replied without looking up. They never demand, only reveal. He almost smiled. To whom do you write so faithfully? My father. And sometimes to those who cannot answer. There was grief beneath her words, quiet but potent. For the first time he realized how little he knew of her inner life, what she had lost, what she endured while he buried himself in silence. He wanted to apologize but found no words worthy of her restraint. Instead, he crossed the room and placed something upon the desk, a small velvet box. She looked up, startled. Inside lay a music box, gilded and delicate, its lid painted with roses. When she turned the key, a faint melody filled the room, haunting, beautiful, unfinished. It was my mother's, he said softly. She played it when she could not sleep. Evelina closed the lid with trembling fingers. Then perhaps you should keep it, Your Grace. Memories are dangerous gifts. He caught her gaze. So is forgiveness. Their eyes held, neither willing to yield first. The silence between them was charged, not with hostility but with something far more treacherous. The following week brought scandal from London. A visiting duchess arrived, her tongue sharpened by envy. Over tea in the drawing room she let slip her poison. How charming that you've managed so well in your husband's absence, she said to Evelina, her smile brittle. One hears such devoted praise of your companionship with Viscount Harland. A kind man, I'm told. The room chilled. Evelina's cup stilled in midair. You hear much for one so far removed from truth, she said calmly. But the seed was sown. By nightfall, the servants whispered. By morning, Alaric had heard. He found her in the garden, pruning roses with gloved hands. The wind tangled her hair, petals scattered at her feet. He approached, voice low. I hear the Viscount has been a frequent guest. She did not flinch. He assisted with the orphanage. Nothing more. Society may not see it so simply. Society, she said, turning to him with sudden fire, sees only what it wishes to destroy. Her defiance startled him. She had always been gentle, measured, but now she blazed with quiet fury. Do you doubt me, Alaric? He hesitated. The question cut too close to his pride. I doubt every kindness, he admitted. They too often conceal intention. Her voice softened, though her gaze did not. Then you will live your life starving for trust, even when it stands before you. He stepped closer. And you will spend yours giving love to those who do not deserve it. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. The air trembled. He saw the pulse at her throat, the storm in her eyes. Then she turned away, her composure returning like a mask. Your Grace, she said quietly, if you cannot tell the difference between charity and affection, then perhaps you are lonelier than I imagined. He left her there, the roses bleeding color into the dusk. But that night, when he passed the open door of the music room, he heard the faint melody of his mother's song, played not by him but by her. She had mended the tune, completed the missing notes. And though he did not enter, Alaric stood in the dark hall and listened, heart unmoored, realizing that something within him, something long frozen, had begun to thaw. The scandal broke like thunder across London. By dawn, every breakfast table in Mayfair rustled with the same sheet of printed shame. The Duchess of Wynthorpe, comforted by another man during her husband's long absence. The ink bled with malice, her name twisted into entertainment. By noon, copies reached Kent. Evelina's maid found her standing at the window, the paper open in her hands, her face drained of all color. She said nothing. Only the slow tightening of her fingers betrayed the storm within. At that same hour, in his London club, Alaric read the same line over and over, until the words seemed to carve themselves into his mind. The neglected Duchess finds solace in Viscount Harland's company. The glass in his hand shattered before he realized he had crushed it. Silence fell around him. Men turned away, pretending not to witness his humiliation. He left without a word, his coat unbuttoned, his composure gone. That evening the Duke of Wynthorpe vanished from the city. Rain chased him all the way to Kent. By the time he reached Wynthorpe Manor, the storm had become a living thing, Wind clawing at the windows, lightning throwing the house into harsh relief. Servants hurried to light candles, whispering that his grace looked like a ghost risen from his own grave. He ignored them all and went straight to the east wing. Evelina waited in the drawing room, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She had changed since he last saw her, less delicate, more defined. The woman before him looked as though she had walked through fire and refused to burn. He threw the paper onto the table between them. "Explain this." She glanced at the headline, then at him. "You believe I owe explanation for another's lies? Your silence makes them truth," he said. His voice was low, almost hoarse. "Tell me it isn't." "I owe you many things, Alaric," she replied evenly. "But the comfort of your pride is not among them." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair. "Did you love him?" The question struck like lightning, brief, blinding, foolish. She laughed, not cruelly but in disbelief. "You think love so easily given? You spent months alone. You had every reason." "I had every reason," she interrupted, "to hate you. And yet I did not." He flinched as though struck. For a moment, the only sound was the storm battering the windows. Then she turned away, her voice softening. "He was kind. He listened. That is all. But you, Alaric, you heard nothing, saw nothing, wanted nothing but silence. And when you gave it, you called it duty." He swallowed hard. "You think I did not feel it? Every whisper, every empty room, every reminder that I had chained someone better than myself to this hollow name." She faced him again. "Then why? Why leave me there to rot beneath your title?" "Because I was afraid," he said, the words forced out as if torn from him. "Afraid that if I touched you I would never stop." Her breath caught. "And that would have been such a tragedy?" "Yes," he whispered. "Because you would have seen me, truly seen me, and found nothing worth loving." A flash of lightning lit the room, their faces caught in its brief, unholy brilliance. For the first time, Evelina saw not the proud Duke but the man beneath, the boy raised to believe tenderness was weakness. His eyes, dark and desperate, searched hers for forgiveness he had never earned. "I have built my life upon restraint," he said, voice trembling. "But every time you look at me I am undone." Her resolve faltered. The distance she had so carefully preserved began to dissolve. "Then why not let yourself be undone?" she whispered. "What has pride ever given you but loneliness?" He took another step toward her. She did not retreat. The air between them quivered, electric as the storm outside. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her since their wedding day. The contact was brief, reverent, and devastating. Evelina closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the simplicity of it, the warmth, the apology unspoken. But when she opened them again he was already withdrawing, retreating into the safety of his own walls. "Do not play at affection, Alaric," she said quietly. "It is not a game you know how to win." He turned away, his voice rough. "You think me incapable of love. Perhaps you are right. But I am not blind to its cost." "What cost?" she demanded. "The risk of being human?" He faced her again, his composure cracking. "The cost of losing control. Of letting someone see what I have spent a lifetime burying. You think I fear your love. I fear what it makes of me." Her expression softened, not with pity but with truth. "Then you fear the very thing that could save you." Outside, thunder rolled like judgment. She stepped closer, so close he could feel her breath against his collar. "I did not betray you," she said. "But I will not defend myself to a man who doubts my heart more than his own." He wanted to speak, to beg, to promise something he could not name. Instead he reached for her again, then stopped, hands suspended in midair, the ghost of touch. His pride, his curse, dragged him back. "You are remarkable," he said finally, voice breaking. "And I have ruined everything I might have been to you." She blinked away tears. "Then start again. Not with excuses, just honesty." But honesty demanded courage, and courage was the one virtue he had not learned. He took a breath as though preparing to confess, and failed. "I cannot," he said. She looked at him for a long, unbearable moment. Then she turned, walked past him, and left the room without a word. He remained where he stood, the silence deafening after her departure. The storm outside began to fade, but the damage was done. On the table lay the ruined newspaper, its ink smeared by the rain dripping from his coat. The headline blurred into nonsense, meaningless now. When dawn came, the servants found the Duke's study empty. He had left before first light, taking no luggage, leaving behind only his signet ring, set neatly upon Evelina's writing desk. She discovered it hours later, glinting beside her half-finished letter. For a moment she thought it some cruel jest, another gesture of absence disguised as civility. Then she noticed the parchment beneath it, the faint indentation of words written but torn away. Only one line remained, pressed faintly into the paper's grain: "If I stay, I will destroy you." Evelina closed her eyes, the ring cold in her palm. For the first time she understood. His love was not her salvation. It was his undoing. And yet, she could not stop herself from whispering into the empty room, her voice breaking like the night before the storm, "Then let me be ruined with you." The letter arrived soaked in rain and regret. Its seal, his seal, was broken before the ink had even dried. Evelina's hands trembled as she unfolded the parchment, her pulse thrumming like the echo of a distant storm. "Return to Wynthorpe," it read in Alaric's unmistakable hand. No apology. No plea. Only command. After months of silence, months in which the Tun had feasted upon whispers of their estrangement, the Duke summoned her back as though she were a servant, not his wife. But beneath the terse demand she felt something new, an ache, perhaps, or a fear he could no longer conceal. She stood at the window of her London townhouse, the rain smearing the glass into silver streaks. The city was a blur of gaslight and horse-drawn carriages, their wheels hissing through the wet cobblestones. Evelina pressed her palm against the cool pane and exhaled. She had promised herself never to return, not to the cold halls of Wynthorpe, not to the man who had wounded her with silence far more cruelly than words. Yet something in that letter, its restraint, its barely contained urgency, called to her. When the carriage finally drew up to the great iron gates of Wynthorpe Hall, the storm had subsided, leaving the world washed clean and sharp. The estate loomed like a sleeping beast, its windows glowing faintly through the mist. The servants' eyes followed her as she entered, half curious, half fearful, as if the walls themselves remembered the echoes of their master's rage. The air inside was heavy with disuse. Candles sputtered weakly against the draught, casting long, trembling shadows across the marble floor. "Her Grace has returned," someone whispered. The words fluttered through the corridor like startled birds. Evelina found him in the study. He was standing by the hearth, a letter crumpled in his fist, the fire painting his face in shades of amber and remorse. He looked older, no, not older but wearier, as though sleeplessness had hollowed him from within. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them stretched, taut and fragile. "You came," he said at last, his voice low. "You summoned me," she replied. Alaric's jaw tensed. "I did not think you would obey." Her eyes flickered to the fire. "Nor did I." There was a pause, the kind that throbbed with everything unsaid. He moved closer, and she caught the faint scent of ink and cedarwood. "I was wrong," he murmured, the words sounding as though they'd been dragged from somewhere deep and long buried. "About you." "About everything." Evelina met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "You called me unfit, Alaric. You made a vow to never touch me." He flinched as though struck. "And every day since, I have cursed the pride that made me speak those words." His hand twitched at his side, uncertain whether to reach for her or retreat. "When you left the house, this life became nothing but echo. I cannot undo what I've done, but I will not watch you fade away from me again." The confession hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. For a moment, Evelina saw the boy he had once been, the dreamer buried beneath the Duke's armor of duty. She wanted to believe him. God help her, she did. But she also remembered the nights she had stood at this very hearth alone, listening to the silence where his voice should have been. "You cannot summon affection as you summon a servant," she said softly. "Love does not answer command." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Then what must I do?" "Nothing," she said and turned away. "For love cannot be taken, it must be given." She left him there, the firelight flickering against the wet sheen in his eyes. That night the house did not sleep. Servants whispered of voices echoing down the corridors, hers steady and calm, his hoarse and breaking. In the garden, rain dripped from the roses like tears. Evelina stood beneath the old oak, her cloak heavy with damp, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. She thought of the girl she had been when she first arrived at Wynthorpe, hopeful, naive, and determined to earn his affection through patience. That girl was gone. What stood here now was a woman who had learned the price of silence. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not turn. "I used to come here," Alaric said quietly. "After the war. Before you. I'd stand beneath this tree and wonder if I had anything left worth keeping." "And what answer did you find?" He hesitated. "None. Until now." For a long while, there was only the sound of rain on leaves. Then, with a trembling breath, He stepped forward and offered something small in his hand, a silver locket, tarnished and warm from his grasp. She recognized it instantly. It had been her mother's, stolen years ago when she left the estate in shame. "I had it repaired," he said. "It was the only thing I could give back to you that was not tainted by my pride." Her fingers brushed the metal. Inside lay a miniature portrait of her, painted without her knowing, her expression tender and far away. Beneath it, a lock of dark hair, tied with a ribbon she'd once dropped in the library. Her breath caught. "Why keep this?" "Because it reminded me," he said simply, "that the thing I cast aside was the only thing that ever made me human." The words pierced her composure. For the first time she saw not the Duke of Wynthorpe but Alaric, the man who had loved too late and too clumsily. Yet she could not yield, not yet. "You cannot undo cruelty with sentiment," she whispered. "Forgiveness is not a token you can purchase." "I know," he replied. "But I will earn it even if it takes the rest of my life." The rain eased into mist. Somewhere in the distance, the clock struck midnight, its chime echoing like a heartbeat. Evelina closed the locket, her thumb resting on the worn engraving. "Do not make promises you cannot keep," she said, her voice breaking in spite of herself. "I make no promises," he answered. "Only confessions." When she finally turned toward him, the moon broke through the clouds, catching in her hair like a halo of pale fire. The look they shared then was neither forgiveness nor rejection, but the trembling space between them, fragile as glass. For the first time since their marriage, Alaric did not try to reach for her. He only bowed his head, rain glistening on his lashes, and said barely above a whisper, "If I must crawl through my own ruin to deserve you, then let ruin be my salvation." The words hung in the damp air, solemn as a vow. Evelina stepped back, her heart pounding, torn between ache and defiance. The locket gleamed faintly against her palm, a small, heavy truth. Then from the house a voice called out, urgent, frightened. A messenger had arrived from London. The Queen's physician, bearing news that could unmake everything they had just begun to rebuild. And in that breath of silence before the next storm, the Duke and Duchess of Wynthorpe stood suspended, between past and promise, between love and the ruin yet to come. The telegram struck like thunder. Its words were few, its meaning catastrophic. His Majesty ill. Parliament divided. Your presence required at once. Alaric read it aloud in a voice that no longer seemed his own. The fire beside him guttered low, casting his shadow long and broken against the wall. Evelina stood across the room, pale as the candlelight trembling on her gown. Neither spoke for a long while. The quiet between them was not peace, it was the silence of an impending storm neither could flee. The Queen's illness was no small matter. Her frail health had long been whispered about in drawing rooms and behind fans, but now the word succession rippled through society like a fever. The Duke of Wynthorpe, once a man content to withdraw into his private exile, was suddenly essential once more. The crown needed him, the strategist, the loyal peer, the unyielding statesman. The very traits that had made him a stranger to love now called him back into the ruthless heart of power. Evelina watched him pace, his every movement taut with dread. She knew this version of him, the man of duty, carved from pride and restraint. "You cannot go back to London," she said softly. "Not now. Not when," she faltered. "Not when we've only just begun to heal." He looked at her then, and she saw in his eyes both devotion and despair. "You ask me to choose between my wife and my sovereign. I ask you to choose yourself," she replied, her voice trembling but sure. "To remember who you are when you are not their duke." But his answer was already written in the hard line of his jaw. "I am what duty made me, Evelina. If I turn my back now, every sacrifice, every scar, becomes meaningless." She turned away, tears burning her lashes. "And what of the sacrifice of the heart? Is that meaningless too?" He said nothing. The silence was answer enough. When dawn came he was gone. The carriage tracks cut through the frost like wounds across the earth. Evelina stood at the window, her dressing gown drawn tight, her heart hollowed by the echo of his departure. She had thought his confession, his trembling vow in the rain, had meant a turning. But love, she realized bitterly, was not a cure for the kind of man the world demanded he be. It was a luxury, and Alaric had never allowed himself luxuries. Days passed without word. Then weeks. The newspapers arrived daily, each one heavy with rumors of royal decline and political intrigue. His name appeared often, the Duke of Wynthorpe, now serving as private advisor to the crown. His speeches were quoted, his loyalty praised. And yet, in every column of admiration, Evelina saw only the man who had once called her unfit, and who now could not bear to stay long enough to prove himself wrong. The house grew colder in his absence. Servants spoke in whispers. Letters arrived sealed with the royal crest but were left unopened on his desk. Evelina moved through the rooms like a ghost, her footsteps barely disturbing the dust. Yet at night she would pause before the study door, imagining his voice, steady, deliberate, echoing between the shelves. She hated him for leaving. She loved him for being unable to stay. Then one night the world broke open again. A messenger came before dawn, soaked to the bone, his eyes wild with urgency. The queen was dead. The nation was in mourning. And the duke, her husband, had collapsed in the council chamber, his body failing under the strain of sleeplessness and grief. The next carriage left within the hour. The road to London was long and merciless. The wind lashed against the windows, carrying the tolling of distant bells, the dirge of an empire losing its heart. Evelina sat rigid, her gloved hands clasped tight. For the first time she did not feel anger toward him, only fear. Fear that pride had claimed him before love had the chance to. When she arrived, the great halls of Westminster were draped in black. The air smelled of candle wax and morning lilies. Courtiers bowed as she passed, their eyes flicking with curiosity and pity. She ignored them all. The guards at the door hesitated before letting her through to the duke's chambers. He was lying on a chaise, pale as parchment, one hand pressed to his chest. His breathing was shallow but steady. A physician rose from his side, bowing low. "Exhaustion, your grace. Weeks without rest, without food. He spoke of you before he fell." Evelina's composure cracked. She knelt beside him, her fingers trembling as they brushed his. His skin was cold. "Alaric," she whispered. "You stubborn, impossible man." His eyelids fluttered. When they opened, she saw a glimmer of recognition, followed by something deeper, softer. "You came," he murmured. "You summoned me," she said, echoing their first meeting. But this time her tone carried no bitterness, only ache. He gave a weak, broken laugh. "Even at the end, I cannot seem to stop commanding you." She smiled through tears. "Then perhaps it is time you learn how to ask." He turned his face toward her, his voice barely a breath. "Then let me ask, stay. Not for duty. Not for forgiveness. But because I cannot remember who I am when you are gone." Her hand pressed to his heart, feeling the faint, stubborn beat beneath her palm. "You were never meant to remember," she whispered. "You were meant to feel." He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his temple. "Then stay until I do." And she did. For 3 days the world outside fell into mourning, the queen buried, parliament dissolved, the kingdom teetering on the edge of unrest. Yet within those quiet walls, time seemed suspended. Evelina read to him from their old books, her voice a steady balm against the chaos beyond the window. He spoke little, but when he did, it was of small things. The oak in the garden, the locket she still wore, the sound of her laughter he'd once been too proud to cherish. On the 4th morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, gilding the room in warmth. Alaric stirred, his strength returning in fragile degrees. He looked at her then, truly looked, and said, "I spent my life mastering every battle but the one that mattered. I knew how to command but never how to yield. Yet the moment I let go of pride, I found peace." Evelina's throat tightened. "And what did you find in me?" He smiled faintly. "Home." She bent and kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his skin. "Then promise me, Alaric, never to let pride steal that from us again." He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "I promise." Outside, the bells began to ring anew, not in mourning this time but in coronation. The dawn of a new reign. Life, as ever, demanded its continuance. Evelina rose and went to the window, the city glimmering beneath the pale morning sun. Behind her, Alaric whispered, "When I said you were unfit to be a wife." She turned, breath held. "I was wrong," he said softly. "It was I who was unfit to be a husband." Her tears came then, silent and cleansing. She crossed the room and gathered his hand in both of hers. "Then let us begin again." And just as she spoke, the door burst open. A messenger entered, his face ashen. "Your Grace, the new king requests your presence at once. Urgent matter of the realm." The echo of destiny filled the silence. Alaric's fingers tightened around hers, his pulse faint but steady. "It seems the world does not wait for love," he said. Evelina held his gaze, her voice steady. "Then let us make it." The bells outside swelled, the sound vast and unending, like a promise half kept, half broken, carrying them both into whatever dawn awaited.